Hi, welcome to this video of Modern Faith. My name is Jonathan Gaylord, the pastor at Yadkinville United Methodist Church, and I am excited to dive into a topic that I think is on the forefront of many of our minds right now as Christians, as people of faith, whereas we're trying to figure out what is the church's role when it comes to politics, when it comes to living a faithful life in the world around us. And so today I'm joined for this conversation by the Reverend Dr. J. Augustine. Jay is the pastor at St. Joseph's AME Church in Durham, but before he arrived there, he was and is a proud graduate of Howard University, served for 4 years as an officer in the United States Army, went to law school down at Tulane, and from there went on to have a very distinguished legal career, including clerking for an associate justice on the Louisiana Supreme Court, serving in the administration of the Louisiana governor. He tried cases related to civil rights before answering the call into ordained ministry and going to seminary, getting his master's of divinity. And then he went on to serve historic St. James AME Church in New Orleans, which is the birthplace of African Methodism in the Deep South. And from there, he found himself in North Carolina. And so I'm glad to be able to have this conversation with Jay and share it with you today. Before we get into that conversation, make sure you hit like and subscribe to this video. Hit that little bell icon so you know everything that's going on and so that you're kept up to date when the next Modern Faith video releases. Welcome to this conversation with the Reverend Dr. J. Augustine, who is a pastor in the AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church, our brethren in the Wesleyan world. And we are so excited to have him with us today to talk about the church and our relationship to politics and civic engagement. And so we give Jay thanks and praise for taking time out of his schedule to meet with us. Especially, I gave him this topic well before the events of January 6th. So maybe when I gave him the topics, it seemed like an easier task than it maybe does now, or maybe last week definitely clarifies some things for all of us as Christians. But so I'm excited to have this conversation with Jay. So thank you, Jay, for agreeing.
Thank you. The pleasure's all mine. Thank you, my brother, for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah. So we'll start off with just kind of I know that over there in Durham, you guys have a very engaged congregation. Even to I think it was your Social Justice Sunday in 2019. Just going through the pictures, I don't know if it was your keynote but one of your big speakers was Senator, then presidential candidate Kamala Harris, now Vice President-elect. And going through the pictures, saw some other candidates for political office there as well that day. So I know that your congregation is very politically engaged. So how does, just kind of opening us up, how does faith in general inform your churches, or should inform all churches towards an individual or collective political civic involvement?
Sure. So number one, thank you again for having me. As far as I am concerned, faith and being a faith practitioner, being someone who is an observant Christian, and obviously someone who is in Christian leadership or position of leadership in an ecclesial community, it is required that the church engage the body politic, meaning the secular world, because we are called on, in my estimation, to speak truth to power, much in the image of Christ himself. Let me back up and say that I approach ecclesial leadership or church leadership from the paradigm of the monist triplex, the prophet, the priest, the king. Those are really three modalities of leadership where every minister should see his or herself in some way, shape, or form, recognizing that you are inclined to be stronger in one than in the other, and probably the third, you middle back and forth a little bit. When you think about the role of the prophet, you think about truly the one in the biblical image who speaks truth to power, who stands up to governmental authorities, oftentimes, as the Lord would say, on behalf of the least of these. When you think about the priest, you think about conciliatory leadership, the typical minister who visits people in the hospital, who buries the dead, who's there for you in the most trying times. And when you think about the king, or to put it in non-gender specific terms, royal leadership, you think about someone who exercises the type of leadership that you want to follow. I have excelled in doing sort of a self-analysis. I have excelled in the prophetic realm of leadership. The congregation I'm blessed to serve, St. Joseph, expects prophetic leadership, and we have done well together in the 2 years that I've been the pastor of the church in re-imaging some of the church's past, some of its history in prophetic leadership, bringing people to the church that speak truth to power in that regard, and engaging the body politic. So it is really part of the Christian ministry to which I was called, is what I'm saying in short.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like there's a lot of overlap between where our faith calls us to be, and I mean, our faith calls us to be active in the world. So there's, of course, a lot of overlap. How do you manage the line between kind of the theological, faith-based, like this is who we're called to be, versus the political climate or political parties, the way that secularly we draw lines in our political world? How does the church kind of speak into the parties of politics in the United States and in the state of North Carolina and locally?
Sure. So when you think about the biblical canon in general, there are numerous examples, and I'm beginning Old Testament. There are numerous examples of prophetic figures, those who were immersed in their faith, at that time Judaism, but those who were immersed in their faith, who had a moral conviction to speak out on behalf of those who were being marginalized, or because they had a moral conviction, they refused to engage or refused to comply with secular authorities' dictates or laws, and they engaged in what we would call civil disobedience. When you think, for example, about the popular narrative in Daniel 3 of the three Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the command to bow down according to King Nebuchadnezzar's dictates, they said, I morally cannot do that because of my closely held beliefs. So they engaged in a form of civil disobedience that, of course, gave us an example for Martin Luther King Jr. to follow centuries later with Letter from Birmingham Jail. When you go back and you follow the Old Testament and you follow in the breach book, I like to call it, Matthew, as it bridges the gap between the two, then we're introduced to the prophetic leadership of a preacher, an itinerant preacher by the name of Jesus. Jesus speaks truth to power. Jesus grew up in an atmosphere where the cross that we have so embraced as a symbol of redemption, because it is, but the cross in Jesus's time was a symbol of terror. Just as in African American communities, the lynching tree was a symbol of terror, and people were left out for others to know, look how this person met their maker. The cross in Jesus's time was the same thing. So he lived in an atmosphere where his people were oppressed by Roman authorities. And Jesus, much in the image of the prophets that preceded him, spoke truth to power because his faith compelled him to do so. That is the same narrative to which other ministers have followed. Dr. King, obviously, in a very popular sense in the 20th century. You can call names like William Barber here in the 21st century. But that is part of really who we are and the public witness we are supposed to have in terms of engaging the public.
Yeah, and that's striking. Last year, I read James Cone's work, "The Cross and the Lynching Tree," and just the point of that he makes there, and that you just made, that the cross wasn't just like this judicial punishment; it was a political punishment of, we want to make an example. And so, the 21st century, the lynching tree wasn't a judicial tool. It was, we want to make an example. We want to enforce kind of these are the bounds. This is where white society is in charge, and Black society kind of.
It was a symbol, and thank you, and a great read. I definitely am a reader of all of Cone's books. But that symbol of white nationalism, that symbol of oppression against other ethnic groups, is the same sort of thing, since you referenced it. The same thing we saw manifest on the day we otherwise would have been celebrating the Epiphany, but we were captivated with an insurrection in the United States of America, where the Capitol was being taken over. And just like the lynching tree or the noose was a symbol of hatred that marginalized groups, the same Confederate flag that we saw running throughout the Capitol last week, the exact same modality, the exact same, to oppress and to marginalize people because of ethnic or an ethnic difference. Let me make a clarifying point. I have led a ministry at St. Joseph. I'm delighted you saw pictures from one Social Justice Sunday with Vice President-elect Kamala Harris here with us then. We've had Social Justice Sundays where we've hosted Ambassador Andrew Young, who of course was one of Dr. King's lieutenants in the Civil Rights Movement. We've hosted William Barber, among others. Social Justice Sunday is something that is part of the fabric of who I really am and part of who we are as a witnessing body that witnesses Christ in liberating ways. So in part of that, I want to be clear that I never advocate in a partisan position from the pulpit. But in terms of political engagement, I will always speak out on behalf of causes that I think are just and causes that need to be put in front of people of faith. So if it means that my position in speaking out against the immigration policies that we embraced of separating children from their families made me anti this particular president who's in the last days of his reign, I'm using that term reign in particular for a reason, then so be it. But we are called on as Christians to be a witness of the faithfulness of Jesus. And Jesus's witness was part of a marginalized class who, again, I love to use the expression, he spoke on behalf of the least of these.
Yeah. So kind of that theme of the least of these, maybe, I don't know if the question that I originally sent you is, are there limits on how the church or where the church or Christians should be inserting our faith into policy decisions or into policy conversations? I don't know if limit is the right word, but what guides you as a pastor, prophet, in your community, and what do you think should guide churches in general when kind of deciding and how to engage with the kind of civic world around us?
So I am always interested in engaging on moral matters. I use the immigration debate as one of them. That was a matter of absolute morality. You do not separate children from their families. You don't put people through those sort of things in the name of government. But another moral matter that is at our forefront now is the COVID-19 vaccine and administering that vaccine. I will share with you, as an African American, in my community, there is a prevalent distrust for government. It dates back long time before, but one of the most popular examples or reasons for the distrust was the popular Tuskegee experiment, where Tuskegee airmen were injected with syphilis. I have heard so much about the vaccine and why I'm not going to take the vaccine, and I don't know about this vaccine, and you go and get a third leg if you want to, and all sorts of jocular things, but really speaking to a distrust of government. It so happens earlier today, I saw President-elect Biden receiving his second shot at our church on this past Saturday. We hosted a panel of health practitioners, physicians, nurses. The very first person in the Triangle area here in North Carolina to receive the vaccine is a nurse practitioner, a member of St. Joseph. We have celebrated her heroism in major ways and put her out front and saluted her leadership. So part of that panel we had on Saturday, one of the reporters was here and asked, well, why is this something that the church would be a part of? I responded politely, of course, but I thought to myself, why is this something the church would not be a part of? The church is about one-stop shopping. It's a place where obviously you come for spiritual sustenance, but it's a place where also you engage the community in political affairs, in matters of civic discourse, in ways that can be of a benefit to others. It's a place for it's a holistic atmosphere where we touch the entire person, not just the spirit, but we touch the entire sense of being and how we live out our faith in communities.
So that is not the end of our conversation with Jay, but we are just going to break it up and release the second half a little bit later. But if you are looking for the links for anything that we've talked about, you can find those down in the description below. And we look forward to continuing this conversation. Drop down in the comments. Let us know what you think so far. Where does faith intersect with our politics and our policies? We'd love to hear from you. Until next week, when we release the second half of this conversation, God bless.